All right, everybody. Thank you for being here. And welcome to session number 97, no less, of the Coronavirus Multispecies Reading Group. Lovely to see you all. And we are very happy to host a longtime reading group member, partner, Sevgi Mutlu Sirakova, who joins us for a conversation about some work in progress, this article underway, Forgotten Stories of Yogurt Cultivating Multi-Species Wisdom, for today. So thanks again for being here, for sharing this work in progress, and thanks to you all for joining in from many different places around the world. I was wondering if we could start today's conversation with you, Sevgi, by maybe tell us a little bit about the broader range of your research. I know you're still dissertating, so tell us a little bit about your research interests as a candidate, and then maybe tell us a little bit about a background. How did you arrive to this this new work?
Yeah, thank you, Rachel, and to also Evan, who cannot be today with us, for providing me with the chance to just share my work with this Coronavirus Multispecies Reading Group. I see many familiar faces have already contributed to the early stages of this work, so I'm really excited. Thank you all for your time and participation. Actually, currently I am working on another project that I received 2-year funding from Andrea von Braun Foundation. It focuses mainly on foodstuff people carry to Germany while visiting their hometowns annually in Bulgaria and Turkey. Many of them are homemade fermented foodstuffs, so fermentation still is main interest area. And with this recent project, I want to explore the multi-species aspect of this food waste of migration. On the other hand, this paper you have read has been evolving for a long time, maybe too long. Give you a quick background. That these forgotten yogurt stories were part of more extensive article titled From Connected Food to Microbial Rift that I submitted to Journal of Environmental Humanities almost 3 years ago. Yes, oh my goodness, time passes quickly. After that, I received helpful feedback and revising it. And accordingly, I left microbiome and metabolic rift content aside for the other articles and prepared the current draft focusing on multi-species ethnographic insights of yogurt making. Till now, I presented it at different events, including RCC Works in Progress groups, in Ferments meeting organized by Rob Dunlap. I have received valuable comments. Particularly, I want to thank you, Amina, who is among us today. She's a scholar of Christian thought. She was the one who encouraged me to frame my article around multi-species wisdom as the central theme. So thank you, Amina. Again, it was quite inspirational for me. As you see, it's still fermenting. So I'm looking forward to its discussion tonight. And I will be also happy to hear your suggestions on how to improve it and your comments on multi-species wisdom. Thank you. Thank you for being with us.
All right, thanks, Sevgi. Well, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more, maybe just to kick things off, about biodiversity loss. You talk about that in your piece, and I wonder if you could just frame for us, what is it that you want people to really understand about this loss in microbial terms? I was thinking sort of about some of the most common ways that people are talking about, biodiversity losses, or, in terms of, climate change impacts and the kinds of visual images that are frequently circulating around those conversations. The kinds of words that frequently get used: extinctions, habitat loss, melting glaciers and icebergs and things like that. But what is it about biodiversity loss that you're seeing in this research, and what is it about it that you're thinking about in terms of fermentation processes?
Yeah, actually, initial somehow inspiration was that I have myself autoimmune diseases. So yeah, I know that most of these autoimmune diseases also connected with somehow microbial diversity we are losing. That's, yeah, most of the research on microbiome also points to that this increase of autoimmune disease, allergic somehow reactions is some closely related with loss of microbial diversity. So while I was thinking about that, also, yeah, we know that somehow biodiversity is not just happening that with charismatic species that we see on all around the media, but also the species that and relations most importantly that we cannot somehow sense and see without somehow engaging with them. So microbial species is part of this biodiversity that we are losing, and unfortunately that as for macrofauna and macroflora is also case, but this is mostly the case for the micro diversity that we don't know them. It's really this biodiversity we even don't know what is about and how big is it and which percentage we lost and we are losing. So they are related for sure, and also every species extinct, they bring their extinction to their own microbiome as well. So species are not just species itself, they are holobiomes, they are hologenomes that live together as symbiotic organisms. Yeah, so yeah, I understand it that way. So in this piece, I wanted to just point that this microbial, somehow biodiversity loss has its somehow further extension with food practices, which is much more somehow easy to communicate because everyone somehow has its own favorite fermented food and knows something about food. So it's very easy to somehow to tell the stories of food because people can make sense. So, and I took yogurt as one that is quite somehow, I thought it's unique. And although we perceive it's quite somehow very easy to access, and taste is quite standardized, but still, when I was hearing all different methods of making it, I was surprised to although it's all around the world, it still somehow has its own different way of making it and different way of can provide us to relate with other species. Yeah. I hope it's helpful.
You know, place is so critical in your research here. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the places that you're engaging with to do this work. And you write also about multi-species protagonists in this plot. So you're engaging in these different layers. But tell us a little bit about place and to start.
Yeah, I have done ethnographic works in Bulgaria and Turkey, particularly 3 places. These places were actually places that I have been somehow familiar with and spent some of my life. So yeah, and it was one of them is Novomahalla village in Rodop mountain in Bulgaria, and the others is Istanbul and Gökçeada in Turkey. So but somehow these places, while I was doing ethnographic work, not just about food, fermented food stuff, but I also somehow tried to collect the food stories from there as well. I was when I was looking for in the literature, and maybe even before starting my somehow this journey, Burcu is among us, and she was the one actually that's within the Turkish community, food community, let's say. We were talking about this yogurt making techniques, that the use of plant juice, and so yeah. So I had somehow I knew these stories from this community as well, but when I went to the field work, I heard them from the people. So the 3 different places, but quite similar stories from these places and from the other places, what I read from the literature, what I also talk with people who are doing ethnographic work within different sites in Turkey. Yeah.
If anybody else wants to jump in, please feel free. I'm gonna check the chat here.
I have a question. Can I ask a question about biodiversity? Could you tell us a little bit more about the role of the diversity? I understood that only 2 kinds of bacteria in commercial yogurt, right? And the different traditional methods have all kinds of source of maybe uncontrollable source of bacteria entering the yogurt. Do you know what the role of that is?
In terms of fermentation or in terms of health value?
And any kind of term. I mean, maybe taste, but is it? I mean, it seems to be fairly random, or it seems to be preserved in a traditional method that that doesn't look at this functionality, right? So it looks at the method, but not of what it does.
Yes. I mean, I was also surprised to hear that commercial, as we know, in the commercial yogurts mainly have limited strains they are using, but most of them are provided by the same laboratory. It was striking to hear that they are somehow produced, to just also circulated all around the world to producing bacteria, producing the yogurt. And the work which I was citing in the conclusion, the traditional yogurts has much more diversity. It's not surprised to hear that, but we know that also from Turkey and also from Bulgaria, who has this yogurt traditions. Every yogurt somehow we have a lot of different yogurts, different names, and we know that each region has its own yogurt, and their taste is quite different, and also their making techniques are different, and so it's not surprised to see that different bacteria are somehow probably having important role in their fermentation. And yogurt has its own somehow relatively good scholarship on food studies mainly, but still this Bulgarian research on yogurts in the Bulgaria, I wouldn't expect that they could find 76 different species of bacteria. Just they were looking to bacteria, and you are the one who is interested in viruses, and it's quite interesting because some studies somehow also concern that viruses are also quite important in fermentation because they are interactive bacteria, particularly phages. So they somehow really have crucial role, and we just recently started to realize that and try to understand that. And I couldn't find any study on the bacteriophage diversity, virus diversity of the yogurt, but if the bacteria are quite diverse, unsurprisingly the other viruses will be much more diverse than the bacteria as well.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Related to the biodiversity, I was interested while reading through your article. I kept wondering, where does the starter culture come from? And you mentioned, and at some point you're mentioning that in Bulgaria somewhere there's the optimal condition for so that the starter culture somehow self-organizes. Is that maybe where you also need the not only the diversity but specific places for the starter culture to emerge, or is that is that not relevant?
Yeah, for sure, it's quite relevant. It's quite place-based practice all the fermentations, particularly spontaneous wild fermentations, that traditional ones that represent microbial terroir, so-called, that they are really somehow indispensable from the locations they are happening. So they reflect their diversity, because as the story is also, which I was trying to tell, they're really somehow harvesting the microbes of landscape that they are somehow engaging. So it's represented somehow landscape, and also the practices is quite interesting in that way, because you can have somehow this kind of diversity, but still it's quite important how you can harvest it, and the methods it's here become quite important to know that you can relate with specific landscape and specific species to produce specific products that maybe without know the bacterial dimension of it, but still spiritually and ritually producing them, it's can somehow yield this biodiversity within the products itself. Does it make sense?
Leslie had something posted in the chat forum. Leslie, did you want to pose your question?
Yeah, Leslie? Oh, okay, shall I read it?
I can read it out loud for you. Besides cultural aspect, what is the role of the local ruler and global advertising taking part for influencing the imagination of microbial diversity in yogurt production?
It's a good question. Actually, when I was writing this piece, I added footnote in the conclusion. You may read it, but I am aware that I am romanticizing them. But on the other hand, already somehow the market and industry are romanticizing them much more. So we have somehow the counter somehow discourse to embrace the traditional ones. Otherwise, they have their own somehow imaginations that try to somehow disseminate with their advertisements for their healing properties, how the yogurt is good and how it's somehow traditionally and historically used for the healing specific diseases. But yeah, but still they are using just limited species, and they're I think they cannot represent this diversity that we are having with traditional ones. It's not just a case for yogurt, case for the other fermented stuff as well, I think so. So while they are having such a big imaginations of their promotion of this kind of products, I think as counter discourse, as somehow just supporting this, pointing this traditional practices is quite important as well as counter, discourses to them, to this global advertisement. Yeah. Yes, Nicole, can we hear your question?
I'm just typing it out because I'm in public. I'm at a coffee shop, so I'll just write it.
Constant debate.
Could you read it?
I was struck by your comment about the constant debate about whether yogurt is Turkish, Bulgarian, or Greek. I didn't know about this debate. In the US, there's a lot of Greek yogurt in the grocery store, and also Icelandic, but not Turkish or Bulgarian. Anyways, where is this debate happening, and what are the stakes? Is this kind of a point of national pride to claim yogurt? Yeah, really.
Yeah, I think this kind of debate is always happening within neighbor countries. It's not just, Bulgaria, Turkey, and Greek, and all we can see all around Europe, maybe America as well. And because these kind of products are products of region, and their own long histories. And it's not just the case for the yogurt. We have the same discussion for the coffee. Is it Turkish coffee or Greek coffee, or and also for lokum and Turkish delight. So we have similar discussions for the much more food, and yeah, for me, it's somehow, as I try to somehow express myself in the article, this kind of foods, particularly like the fermented food stuff, have their really deep histories that I think even the recent nations cannot claim the ownership, none of them.
Leslie is posted here as well. I'll read it out loud since they're unable to vocalize. Is there any observation from your multi-site fieldworks that might see potential competition and conflicts that span across these locations in reproducing discourses of yogurts?
Let me think about that. Multi-site fieldworks. Interesting. I haven't thought about that. Let me think. I cannot provide a quick response. I have to more think about that. Yeah, but it's a good question to reflect later on. And unfortunately, Leslie, I cannot provide you a quick response about that. Potential competition, not potential competition, but as somehow, particularly for the forgotten stories, I saw a lot of similarities when I just also looking for the literature. Yeah, we just come across quite striking similarities about making them, and I don't see them as somehow a competition of differences. Is it possible that yogurt could be sense? Yeah, food is always sense of social identity. Somehow, it's huge scholarship about that, and and for the diaspora studies, food has been always somehow quite essential topic to discuss with. Start with to thinking about this diaspora identity. So yeah.
Burko was mentioning this sort of national, kind of returning to the national questions in their posts, and then Astrid, you've got a question about the spring air microbiome. Yeah, I'm interested in that too.
Yeah, please. If you have asked a specific question, I would be happy to answer.
Well, the first question is did they only make yogurt in the spring traditionally? So if that is so significant and if there's actually an alteration of the microbiome in the air that is somehow harvested, so is there a seasonality to yogurt making traditionally? And I'm having trouble to imagine what is this air microbiome anyway. And you mentioned some. As you maybe also know, I'm really interested in rhythms, right? And you have some seasonality here in the yogurt making process that depends on the seasonality of the microbes. I find that really fascinating, and just anything you you can tell me more. If you can tell me more about it.
Yeah. As we know, for the dairy practices and most of the let's put it that way, somehow fermentation is somehow ancient way of preserving food, and it's quite seasonal in that sense. You somehow try to preserve your harvest when you have most of them for the later consumption, that in the winter or later on maybe you cannot have them as fresh as you have in the autumn or summertime. Is it case for the dairy products as well? Because animals, not in the industrial farming, but in the somehow their ecological environment, they have their own cycles, their own seasons, and so some cheeses are quite seasonal as well. But for yogurt, we have all around the year. I can say that as long as we have milk, because sometimes cows give milk for because they have their, how do you call it, pregnancy, to continue to giving milk. And but you can have it from your neighbor, and in winter times milk somehow became rare, but we usually have, and yogurt is thing that made all around the year. But in these cases, their somehow Maya starter are refreshed. So they use somehow, particularly for the hydroless yogurt, the springtime as the time which spring starts and the celebrations happened, the time that they can refresh their Maya. It means that they have their own Maya, I mean the yogurt, and yogurt is always made by using the old one, or you can borrow from your neighbor. So it's always has to have its own somehow previous small starter, and it's just a very small amount that you put to incubate the new yogurt. And this hydroless time, they somehow, in the case of the collecting the spring rain, which you mentioned about iron microbiome, they are collecting the spring rain to just refresh the Maya. They are putting this spring rain to their Maya. I mean yogurt. Yogurt is Maya itself. So because every time you make new yogurt, you use old yogurt. So they are putting this spring rain to, they call it, to refresh it, the Maya, and they are not aware of microbes for sure. I mean, when I'm talking with them, I'm not asking anything about the microbes, but yeah, I'm asking more the rituals and why they are doing it, how they are doing it, and I try to make sense how they are perceive it. And yeah, they are thinking that this spring rains, probably it's spring, it's time that everything change and everything is fresh, and yeah, it's something as they put it in from the other literature, something happens in the air that you have to somehow grasp and harvest of this somehow spirit of the spring to use for your yogurt. Yeah, when you are collecting spring any rains, it has its own microbes. Yeah, probably most of them coming from the air. If you keep them in some specific space, for sure the other contamination will happen. But as somehow when you are collecting, I think most of them. I'm biologist, but I don't know really the biological aspects of it so much, as I also already written in my article. I wasn't interested in the biological aspects as well, but when I presented to the biologists, they were fascinated, and they're actually already applying a project to explore the microbiome of the ant yogurt in Denmark University. So it's quite interesting that they were really fascinating about this, as you mentioned, the microbial side of it. And after talking with them, I just realized I have to write something about that, because yeah, it's quite new, and we don't know so much things about that. There's a lot of theories, and stories can be told from the microbial side as well. So I included them, but I have to admit that I don't know so much microbial and biological aspects of them. But I heard some of them from Rabdan and other biologists interested in fermentation.
Thanks, Sevgi. It looks like we've got Lenny posted something. I'll read that out loud, and then Amina has a hand raised. So Lenny wrote, I'm curious if you haven't encountered more endemic explanations of why yogurt has positive health and healing properties. I am constantly encountering the pattern that for thousands of years we have known these products have beneficial effects for the consumer, but that we didn't know until the advent of molecular sciences and so on. But how have these properties been accounted for otherwise? I suppose there is this tendency to impose a dissonance between knowing that and knowing how, though how have we known over the rich histories associated with yogurt?
Yeah. It's a great question. It's a great question, but yeah, I just wanted to share these stories to inspire somehow this kind of thought. Myself, I am not really into it because, yeah, I just, I'm not somehow philosopher, I'm just anthropologist trying to understand what people are doing and how they are pursuing. But I would like to pass this question to Amina, because I just feel like, right, that she's the one that as theologist and working on fermentation in that sense can say something. Amina, could you comment a little bit? Sorry, to point of view, but yeah.
Oh, well, if I don't fully grasp what's at stake in Lenny's question, doesn't sound like they can jump in and correct me. But I'll add to the question because ours were related, I think, and then maybe I'll try to answer the one that's not my own. I noticed at the end of the article you talk about this way of knowing that becomes so technical that it becomes an unknowing or a threat to more ancient ways of knowing or wisdoms. So there's this idea that there was something about the way we used to know how to make yogurt that is actually threatened by the information that we have microbiologically. So as in now we know about these 1 or 2 microbes that have to be present for the kinds of yogurt cultures and products that we want. And you quote Tim Ingold, who kind of says something similar. There's something about knowledge that begins to shove out a kind of ancient wisdom. And so I would just I'd be interested in hearing you say more about what you're getting at there. Is it simply that when we didn't know, is it simply that before we didn't know what aspect of quote unquote living wisely or living well contributed to the health of a garden or of a yogurt culture, such that we had we had to live well in all the ways that tradition had taught us to, and then along comes this more extractivist approach of take this microbe, plop it in this dairy, and we don't have to have a life way. We don't have to have a life practice or wisdom or attentiveness. We can. So I guess I don't want to answer my own question. I'm wondering what you're getting at there, and I'm excited to hear what you what's behind that. I'm curious about this question, Lenny, because I've been thinking about the ways that these attentive ways of culturing food have might be framed in terms of mindfulness, and mindfulness becomes, this thing that Western medicine again is all of a sudden saying, aha, there's finally proof. There's what's the word? The neuroplasticity is finally the proof that we needed to defend these more quote unquote Eastern ways of being well in mind and body. But it wasn't until the science comes along that we can actually affirm that there's something to mindfulness or attentiveness. And so I find it interesting that this combines two things. It's like a multi-species wisdom, but it's also a mindfulness and an attentiveness that says literally the making of my brain pathways that brain pathways that are healthy loops are cultivated inside in a material, anatomical, or neurological way when I'm attending well to multi-species cultures around me. So that's all I'll say for now. Yeah.
Thank you, Amina. Thank you, Amina. Yeah, I will try to answer Amina, and just also addressing the Lenny question as well. Yeah, people are somehow aware that food has some health properties because, yeah, it's so somehow basic food that you consume every day. Yeah, almost every meal except breakfast. So it's always on the table, and particularly when you are getting older and you have stomach problems and you have digestion problems, yogurt are something that you consume. That I know from my childhood as well, that yogurt is something that whenever you are ill that you can eat, and particularly whenever you have some kind of particularly not just infections but poisons as well, that you are always yogurt. You are given always yogurt. So I think and I know that it wasn't recommended by doctors. They were just giving us that. So probably they knew it from their previous generations that they were giving yogurt in this cases to heal people. And yogurt first was used also not just for eating, for those, so whenever you have some kind of my English is just disappearing. Skin problems, that yogurt is something that people also can recommend for the sunburnings and for several things that they are. So yogurt is something that you are not just consuming, just some as real medicine, real balm that you can put whenever you need it. And also, yeah, it's used for, quite importantly, it's used for the vaginal diseases as well. And it's quite interesting because it has the same microbiomes within the vaginas we have. So it's somehow contribute to the diversity within vagina. So yeah, it has a lot of wide range of the somehow healing practices behind that. Probably some of them I am not aware of them. I'm just listing that I know from my childhood. So yeah, but this kind of things, again, people are doing not because they know the microbes and they know the somehow the healing components of yogurt. They do it because it's yogurt and it has much more different meaning and maybe much more maybe holistic understanding of healing and food and relations with our health as well. I hope, is it helpful? That I know your questions really lenient. I mean, it's more about the multi-species wisdom, and yeah, I'm just checking the question again. Yeah, I hope it's helpful that I just, yeah, what I was telling.
Google had a question too about continental microbiome transfer via air. We're interested in dust and spring rain and dew.
Yeah, but it's quite known in the agriculture somehow, agriculture studies, because this kind of dust is quite important as fertile component for the soils, because they somehow provide not just microbes, probably microbes are also transferred, but also minerals that are quite the iron and the other, because dust is itself, as we see, red, the really other maybe essential minerals that are needed to the agriculture and for the landscape itself. So yeah, it's good question. And it's also maybe Astrid is aware of that as well. It's also quite known that the marine microbiome is also transferred via somehow this kind of not continental, but big airwaves, because you just feel it smell as well from the sometimes from the rather long distances. So probably it's microbiome. Alks are transferred as well. I don't know, but yeah, I cannot. I can imagine that it's not surprised that microbiomes can be transferred in this long way of the continental.
Mina has a hand up.
Yeah, if I missed it in your paper, forgive me. Do you know what the oldest documentation is or indication is of yogurt making? I have bread and beer and wine in my head, but no sense of yogurt's history and prehistory. And I'm asking in part because of Lenny's question, thinking about all of the religious connotations and references to fermentation and leaven in general and yeast and bread and wine and beer, but very little I'm realizing on dairy. A little bit on cheese I can think of within Christian tradition or Jewish tradition, and nothing on yogurt.
Interesting.
That's at least like prior to 500 Common Era, I would say.
Yeah, probably beer is much more sacred, because it's somehow alcohol content and used in the religious ceremonies. But yogurt, I also cited in my paper. It's first used in this Kashgari Divani Lugat Turkey, which is somehow known as first Turkish dictionary, and it's just in around 1000 after Christus. But it's quite interesting that in this same source that indicate that it's also used in Uyghur text, which somehow, it's again around 1000, after Christus. So it's not really old, probably because beer and bread are somehow indicated in much more early texts from Egypt and from the ancient societies from Middle East. But as far as I can find this one, but Amina, can I? Okay.
Yeah, and that's helpful. It's always amazing to me in these groups when how it points out the basic things that I realize I've never considered, which is even just how long has yogurt been around?
But it's also about the yogurt is somehow in the realm of the different languages. So probably beer and other dairy practices are much more in the European European continent, and we have a lot of references about that. But the yogurt probably are much more in the societies that don't have so much written records. But the archaeological studies indicates that it's really ancient, and it belongs. It's somehow part of somehow the evidence found in the Çatalhöyük, which is the first settlement that starts off the somehow agriculture societies gathering, living together, and they found their yogurt traces. So yogurt is probably as old as agriculture practices started.
Lenny's got a hand up.
Yeah, I hope everyone can hear. That's good. But I just want to thank Amina and Sevgi for some really lovely points of synergy. And just to draw on the question about the age of yogurt, I've been working recently with some histories of Kumis, which is a related product, also fermented dairy, but it also undergoes a mild alcoholic fermentation in addition to the lactic acid fermentation, and it's quite popular in a lot of Turkic areas, and it's also in the Mahmud al-Kashgari compendium, and there some research has been able to extrapolate that there's been proof of production of that for at least 5,000 years in that region, more in Central Asia. One thing that's really interesting about kumis and also yogurt, I believe as well, is that the name of the product also reflects attributes of it. So kumis is sort of like a sour, it can in certain contexts, this is in the Kashgari compendium, referred to sort of a state of sourness that's quite distinct from other designations of sourness. Like I think Sevgi, in your paper, you talk a little bit about this idea of like essences and like state transformations. And in the case of kumis, it is sort of, it's not a product that's transformed from one state to another. Like milk has become soured. It is a sort of valorized state in itself. And so far as I've encountered it, I think yogurt does something sort of similar. It's not milk being transformed from one essence of milk to another thing. It is sort of, it has an integrity of its own that I think other substances that undergo similar transformations don't necessarily have reflected in their names. Or I don't know if that's something that's emerged in your work as well, or if you have anything that would speak to that.
Yeah, thank you, Lena. I think it's really exciting to hear about Kumi as well. And yeah, people maybe they know that milk, someone, because they are seeding, they are culturing the milk. They are aware that it's transformed. They take care of this transformation somehow. But yeah, but one resources which I found also cited in my paper, maybe you notice it, that one somehow specific group, it was somehow collected by Ali Rıza Yerman from the this Turkmen oymakları, Turkmen tribes in the south, and they were somehow telling some similar things, that if nomads want to make yogurt and cannot find enough starter culture to make yogurt, they crush the tiny eggs of ants sheltering on the stone in their plums. When you put this into the milk that was decided to be made into yogurt, that milk becomes yogurt. So it's about, again, it's yes, you decide something and you just, you know that milk is in the good condition to become yogurt, because every milk probably, it's not good candidate for become yogurt. It has to be fresh and it has to be somehow, has good resources, and maybe season is quite important as well. So yeah, somehow it has its own properties, and they know it's good candidates to somehow yield the yogurts. Yeah, in that sense, maybe, yeah, we can interpret it that sense, that this some milks that they consider they can yield the yogurt.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could maybe comment a bit more on, I want to go maybe with the last bit of our time, talk a little bit about some of the language that you use or that you draw from your interviewees. But one of the things that you kind of posit in the piece is this intergenerational correspondence. And it's such an interesting framing to say correspondence. So I just wonder if you could say a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was correspondence, because whenever somehow I was trying to understand how they are making yogurt or the other probably fermented food as well. Yeah, you have to somehow recall how your mother or how your grandmother you thought about it, and you somehow inseparably you thought about your memories about that, how you learned it, how you tested, and what you knew about that. So it's always somehow, it's a long stories while making food, particularly, not just yogurt. So yeah, they don't have their food books, receipts to follow, written records. They know it by heart, and they know it from their memories, and probably they know it their memories from their family members. So it's correspondence that way. They have to recall them. They have to recall how was it, and how was eaten. Not just a production, also consumption phase also require recalling of the past times, and as I call it, wisdom of their family members that maybe passed away, and in that way they can also remember them.
And what about, I mean, you really take preservation. So memory is a core component of your methodology. You take a term like preservation as a core act or goal in doing this work. And I'm just curious, I mean, if we think about a term like fake, fake yogurt that's being used by your interviewees, for instance, I mean, what do you think it takes then to preserve, to remember, to recall, to correspond? I mean, I'm thinking a little bit about maybe how your interviewees are talking expressly about this example of fake yogurts, as there's something else to maybe draw out a little bit more in your draft too. What is their sense, or how are they articulating the question of the losses of microbes? Is it expressly through preserving certain recipes or techniques? Is it through resisting, fake yogurts, or biotech companies that are patenting certain strains and not others? I mean, how are they articulating this goal of preservation and memory? And
yeah, it's a question I have to think more about. Yeah, I also, as I mentioned earlier, when I was writing it, also I didn't want to somehow pose somehow imagination of fermentation as stable one. Fermentation practices changes with time, and also they are somehow not free from the social power relations, and gender has crucial role within it. So I'm aware of that, but I didn't want to somehow engage with this article, because I think it's quite important to ask these questions, but it's require other works to think about that. And what they think about that preservation, fermentation itself, it's somehow not metaphorically, just it's literally it's preserving things. So their practices are changing as well. For example, the forgetting yogurts, which I were telling it, some of them are not practiced anymore. So yeah, they are still maybe making home yogurt from their previous yogurt, or yogurt starters brought from their neighbors, but some of them are still refreshing their yogurt with spring grains, but less and less families are doing it. And so, yeah, for them, they are aware that new generations are not interested in these practices. And also, some of the particularly new generations rise in cities, they don't like this kind of yogurt because they are really strong, the taste and milk itself. So they don't want to consume it. So there is these changes happening, and I don't know what's going to be, but the reality is that this practice is getting less and less, and they have their own consequences that we have to reflect on. And they are worried about that, particularly, maybe it's part of the nostalgia, but particularly old generations are quite concerned about that they are aware that these practices they are learned from their grandmom, not practiced anymore, and they are sad about that. But yeah, like all the food practices, they are changing as well. And yeah, as I told you, they have their own consequences that we have to face in following years, next years. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Sevgi. This was such a lovely paper and a lovely dialogue. I do want to, before we close today, look ahead to our next session. We've got Claire Herrick, who's going to meet with us at 9 a.m. London time, Professor of Geography and Department Chair of Global Affairs at King's College London, who's going to share her work on clinical vulnerabilities and the politics of personal responsibility, I believe in home quarantining. As well as a piece with Anne Kelly, who's been with us before on infrastructural aversions and humanitarian responses to COVID. So thanks everybody so much for joining us, and thanks for these wonderful questions. And Sevgi, thanks so much for sharing your work with us.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's going to be really quite inspirational for somehow improving my work. And thank you, and keep this conversation going on and inspiring each other. Thank you.
Thanks everybody. See you next time.